Hi, everyone. We're just letting everybody in. We'll just get started in a couple of minutes. Folks are still joining in. I'm sure you've seen the news on the blue screens with Microsoft. So we're just kind of figuring out how that changes the dynamics today. And hopefully not too many Microsoft users are affected, or for not too long, at least. In the meantime, we will invite everyone to introduce yourself in the chat. As you know, you can participate fully here. Let us know your name, if you'd like to share your organization, and also where you're joining from today. So please feel free to use the chat as a way to network with your colleagues as well, just as the roundtable unfolds. We also request everybody to keep yourselves on mute and raise your hand as we open up the floor after the roundtable hosts state their remarks. We'll just get started in a minute. All right, so I think it's time we get started. I'd like to welcome everyone. We still have folks who are pouring in, but this is a 1-hour session and we'd like to conclude on time. So I think it's just in the interest of time, it's good we get started now than later. I'll just quickly introduce myself and welcome the host today too. Let me get the... Here we go. We'll just put the spotlight on the speakers. So my name is Navroop Sadev. I'm the founder CEO of the Digital Economist. We are a Washington, D.C. based impact platform. We are present globally, and a lot of the folks of the community, our fellows, team members are joining in today. So we're very excited to welcome you for what is the first webinar on applied AI, a work group practice area we have within the organization, along with the collaboration with the governance group today. Few important announcements before we kind of get started. We are very excited, first and foremost, to do a little bit of a soft launch while we have all of you here for our executive fellowship program. This is going to be its 6th cohort, second in this year. And we're almost 5 years old as an organization. Our mission is to build a human-centered economy, and the products and the services and the platforms that along the way need to be built out, right? And so it's really an innovation platform in every sense of the term. And before I kind of get started here, I'd like to just quickly introduce the hosts, just letting you know who they are so you can identify them in the room. They're all here. We have Jose joining us from Portugal, Melodena joining us from Dubai, Bettina is joining us from Germany, Aurélie from Los Angeles, Mark from Boston, and Hira from San Francisco. So with that, I think we can get right into it. Melodena, the floor is yours. The format of this roundtable is that everybody would go for 5 minutes and then we'll open the floor. So again, it's a very democratic setup today.
Thank you, Navroop. So, well, hi, everybody. It's really awesome being with you, and I can see everyone comes from different backgrounds. I thought I would set the stage and talk about why we need guardrails for AI. Before I even begin, I thought, let's get us all on the same page. And I like to use the word artificial intelligence systems. And what do I mean by that? I know there's a lot of words floating around. The way I look at it, these are machines that mimic human intelligence, which means if it's only mimicking human intelligence, you need a human in charge. And it's actually a combination of hardware, software, and data. So I'm going to come more onto this as I keep going on. So historically, when you look at artificial intelligence, the concept was there in the early 1955s. There was always this huge idea of economic potential. At one point, PwC thought it would contribute 15.7 trillion US dollars. And this was echoed by WEF, by the way. But we saw very quickly that the numbers started getting revised downwards, right? So you can see by 2022, they're looking at about 1,000 billion. Let's talk about generative AI. We see very much the same pattern. When it came out, Bloomberg Intelligence talked about it being a 13 trillion economy. And again, we saw very quickly the numbers coming down, right, to 900 billion. So what's going on? Is their potential high or is it not? And it's very simple that most AI firms face something like a 50 to 85% failure rate. And this is across private sector and government. And there's quite a lot of research talking about this. So there's something missing. And those of you who woke up today morning to the Microsoft outage, you realize it can be as simple as an update, but it has global implications currently right now, right? And this is not something new. Facebook had the same issue in 2021. This was an update that they put up and it caused everything to kind of slow down. We saw the same thing happening with Boeing with the MCAS failure, which resulted in the loss of lives. We saw in UK when they turned to algorithms for grading during the pandemic and the uproar it reached, right? So there is economic potential, but we need to be aware that there is also a high failure rate. AIS and human opportunity, huge human opportunity, right? So I'm going back to an old report. WEF in 2020 talked about how it would be a net economic job creator, right? And they said most of the jobs you had to worry about were the low-income jobs. But when you look again at their latest report, we actually see advanced technologies. They think it's going to be a detractor, right? And we're seeing reports of, fresh graduates not being able to find jobs. If you can see the little Twitter post that's down there of BBC, where about 60 writers and editors were suddenly replaced by one person who was a prompt engineer. This raises interesting questions, right? What are the jobs of the future? If you have education for 15 years, can we actually consider that? And what is the usefulness of this? And should we be looking long-term about creating jobs, not just new jobs for 1 year, but for 15 years, because that's how long it takes, let's say, to pay off a house loan. Let me also just very briefly talk about the planetary opportunity, right? If I take a single chip, a silicon chip, which is the heart of AIS, it travels over 100,000 miles. And you might say, maybe this is not much, but if you look at the recent DHL Global Connectedness Report, most things travel only 3,000 miles. So you can see the carbon footprint of everything we use that has AI. And the worst thing is, e-waste is not recycled. 80% is just discarded and it goes back into the environment. The most sustainable countries in Europe, for example, send their waste to Africa and Southeast Asia. So we have an issue over here on transparency. This is things like prompts, like when you do prompts, it's not just carbon footprint you have to worry about, it's about how much water is being consumed. And I know there is a huge narrative about carbon offsetting and carbon neutrality. This is not enough. If you plant a new tree, it actually produces more carbon till it becomes mature, which takes about 15 years before it can actually remove carbon from the environment. So again, we cannot today be ignorant of these facts. We have to be brutally honest about what's working and what's not working, right? And I think with that, I just want to add one more point, that the most important thing when we look at AI currently right now is the ability to, how do we go and look at trade-offs? When we look at AI, we often use the word risks, but I think risk is something that is more about profitability. We have to look at short-term and long-term trade-offs. And this is where the guardrails come in. How can we ensure planet and human flourishing. And with that, I'm going to stop and hand over to
Mark. Thank you so much, Melodena. Appreciate it, and thank you also for staying up in the evening. And I'll stop sharing your screen if that's okay. Over to you, Mark.
Great. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
Yes, we can.
Great. So following on the introduction from Melodena, my role in my 5 minutes is to give you a sense of where the current AI governance is currently taking us. And I'd like to break it down, if I can, with the time I have, in roughly 8 major trends that we see now largely injected into the narrative about AI governance. So first of all, I think we started to notice more and more that we are redesigning jobs and responsibility that are taking into account the input of algorithmic governance. This is so like new in the sense that we are recognizing to some degree that AI is not only an externalities or an internal capabilities, is a much more strategic onset that we have at the organizational level. So what we've seen in terms of enhancing the governance impetus has been to fundamentally start creating more key accountable people in the organizations for the AI function. Now, the second trends that are coming as a derivative to that is that if you are enhancing the role and responsibility, you're equally going to rethink your workforce. So today, there is a rising story about the people that we're hiring. To follow on the conversation Melodena brought forward, it's not necessarily about replacing people, but much more about enhancing the current skills so that we can integrate artificial intelligence as part of a toolkit that is now redefining the governance of workforce in the organization. But how do we also make sure that as we have an opportunity to insource talent, we are building on the right level of diversity, which will be necessary for the design of the any form of algorithmic structure that can ensue out of that. This has created 2 subsets, which will go into the trend 3 and 4. First of all, there is a much more clairvoyant sense of governance structure that is not only coming from governance from a financial perspective, but we now see governance that is both financial but equally technological. And this has created a different mandate from many boards that are now integrating more and more conversation on the input of technology and the necessary oversight that is required to understand technology away from a paradigm of neutrality, but much more about the implemental and definitional sense of technology in the first place. As a fourth trend that I like to bring forward to you, we started to see what we have seen equally years ago with the conversation on sustainability, when the level of maturity was bringing the conversation to the idea that we should embed sustainability into the value chain. The very same is happening right now. There are ongoing conversations around the world on how do we embed AI within the organizational strategy. And so this is important because we are recognizing the inherent nature of transformation that technology really have. By integrated inside of the company strategy, we are equally legitimizing this to become more than just an efficiency enhancer, but we elevate artificial intelligence to the role of propulsion of value, creation of value. And this is important because if we do this at the strategy level, it will likely impact the supply chains, considering that on a global level, the majority of organizations today are still largely horizontally integrated. So they depend greatly on a neck layer of supplier, and the integration needs to happen all in terms of the contractual terms of a financial nature, but equally in terms of the technology stack that is required to navigate that. I'm going to be quick on the other 4 trends. This is rethinking the processes internally on how do we understanding the use of AI. So there are a number of different processes to understanding the unintended consequences of technology. And so we're building contingency plans more and more. Trend number 6, we are looking at stakeholder engagement, We understand this is becoming a wider society narrative, and therefore we need to have a better understanding of the societal implication across layers. That means that naturally it will impact trend number 7, the monitoring, the reporting, the evaluation, the idea that we are looking at this more than simply an internal upgrade of the infrastructure, but is really a way of positioning an organization inside of the market with implications that come with that. And as I close my 5 minutes, the very final trend that I think I've seen, so trend number 8, within the context of governance of AI, is the development of the supporting infrastructure that is going to help us navigate the kind of expectation that we need to have. They're not necessarily easy expectation. There is a bandwidth conversation. There's a speed and internet conversation. There's an energy conversation, as Melodena hinted before. So question will be, can we have an infrastructure that's going to support and endure at the proper level of the governance framework that is required? The end game of these 8 trends is to engage, to integrate, but equally to increase the transparency to the end user. And that is a form of creating a much more conscious AI rather than an AI that is historically coming just from the technology origins. So these are my 5 minutes with you, folks, on the conversation about governance trends right now. Moving back to you, Navroop, I think we are around the 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you keeping it on time, and also to Melodena. I'm glad you're able to join back in. And very interesting dynamics and sort of the, the overlap that we're exploring here of AI, of the need for governance, what that means for sustainability. So we'll continue that. Bettina, over to you. Please also do introduce yourself. You're from SAP. You lead their ethics practice. Please tell us about yourself, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so I'm bringing the industry perspective to the discussion right now. Yeah, and as you said, I'm in the development organization for AI systems, or AI core at SAP, and I'm leading the responsible AI and AI ethics team and efforts. And what I would like to share is a view into the practice of AI ethics and responsible AI in our everyday work as a provider of business software. So the goal is in the end to enhance business users with AI capabilities in the business software. But how can we do this to complying with responsible AI and AI ethics requirements? So what we do, we are building everything on AI ethics principles in 2018. SAP has defined and committed to a set of guiding principles for ethical AI. And just recently, and it's hot off the press, you won't find it on the website yet, but we have now moved our commitment to follow the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI. Going forward, content-wise, there is not much of a change, but moving to this globally accepted set of principles was an important step from our perspective. We have principles since a couple of years. Based on the principles, we have defined an internal AI ethics policy that translates what is in the guiding principles into requirements that are relevant for our context as a software provider in our specific domain. And this is then more concrete, of course, than the guiding principles. We have also links to other internal policies in there, like data protection and privacy. And this policy, adhering to this policy, is binding for all employees who are working on AI systems and use cases that include machine learning capabilities. So the setup includes of AI ethics at SAP includes a governance process also. So we don't have just the requirements, but we also check if those are fulfilled and if the teams are adhering to those. And as a practical example, or sharing just some best practices here, I want to show you what happens when a team decides to work on on a use case that is including AI or machine learning capabilities. And now I struggle to find the button for the screen sharing, unfortunately. Just a second. Yeah, maybe I just try to describe. Here we go. Sorry for that. So when a team is deciding that in their use case it makes sense to include machine learning or AI capabilities, they start defining their use case, and then they complete an impact assessment form that is one of two self-assessments that the teams conduct. And in this first assessment, it is identified, is it a red line case which is prohibited, affecting personal freedom, harmful to society, harming the environment, that is not allowed to be built. If there are, we have a couple of criteria that define a high risk or high impact case. You see them here on the left-hand side. Is personal data being processed, sensitive personal data being processed? Is automated decision-making a part of the use case, and is the use case situated in a high-risk sector? In our case, usually this is everything related to human resources. Critical infrastructure is another high-risk sector. If two or more of these criteria are checked as applicable to the use case, then the use case needs to go through an additional step, namely a review by the AI Ethics Steering Committee, which is a group of senior managers that represent from all board areas, that represent the executive board, and look at the use case, understand what are the specific risks related to that, understand is the team mitigating the risks appropriately, and if the steering committee is convinced of that, then the use case is approved. If they are not, then it is rejected and cannot be pursued. And then, like for standard use cases, the software is being developed, and before delivery, they need to fill out another assessment that in which they confirm that they address all the requirements as laid out in the AI ethics policy and describe how they address them. So this is the process that we have established, and the assessment outcome is also documented in the context of our general software development process and our quality assurance system. So this is how we put AI ethics into practice at SAP.
Thank you so much, Bettina. Appreciate it. We do have folks asking in the chat if you'll be open and willing to share this with the community. So if that's okay, please feel free to drop that in the chat, or we can send it afterwards as well. But yes, there's a lot to unpack here in 5 minutes. It's a bit of a challenge. So good job there, Bettina. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next speaker as well, because we want to leave as much space as possible for questions and engagement. And you can start asking those in the chat as well, or any inputs you might have. But there will be at least a good 20 minutes within the 1 hour session towards the end to do that. I just want to bring our next speaker here to kind of talk about his work and take on guardrails around AI, and that's Hira Dangol. He's joining us from Bank of America in San Francisco. Go ahead, Hira. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Navrup, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone out there globally. So I work for Bank of America. I lead AI automations and platform development. It's an in-house facing platforms that we have built from zero to MVP, and then scaled out enterprise-wide across 14 line of businesses. So coming back to around this topic alignment, I'll take back to, I think, from the perspective of AI, right? AI from the industry and enterprise landscape is, I consider this is kind of more like a classic machine learning models that has been operating for years, right? Before this Gen AI came into play. So that means it's hundreds of models are being operating in the production infrastructure, serving the business use cases, either the data-centric model based to NLP. Now with the emergence of this large language model powered by the foundational model, right, which is kind of now the move we are seeing globally in terms of the productivity gain on the Gen AI. So it's a two vertical evolutions, but if you look at the alignment from the governance needs, it's kind of the need on the both side of the houses, right? Meaning data and the model governance has been pretty much maturized across the enterprise and the industry. But when it comes to the Gen AI, it's kind of like work in progress, right? You can connect to the NIST standards that are in flight. You can look at the executive order, European AI Act, and some of the web's articles or the paper series that came out back in January too. So the current state and the future state is fundamentally kind of like evolving, and it's based on like this lateral view, what I think is, as an organizational move where whether you are on the early stage of AI development cycle or you're taking this classic MLOps view into the generative AI, the archetypes, two type of archetypes that I have seen is from the innovator cycles to the visionary, which is kind of development side, to someone on that front taking into execution path, and then adoption. So it involves like a starting with the business alignment. That's what I've seen, right? So business alignment, make sure that any use cases we're introducing is aligning to business need, and then ensuring the technology business and the risks are on the kind of the operating framework, right? And then the value proposition is where I think it's heavily discussed, right? What are the key drivers that you're introducing? And then what's the goal and what's the business outcome? And then how this is going to be adopted on long term, right? So while you are having that discussion, I think in every small and the different shape and size of the organization enterprise world, there is an organization which is, I think, perhaps which aligns to this topic is the risk organization, right? It's whether it's a model risk framework, whether it's a risk frameworks, you need to consider about the AI risk management functions. I think from the model governance to data governance, and then coming back to responsible AI, which is directly connects to generative AI space, right? So that's where I think the majority of the times are spent and the challenges needs to be addressed. You might be spending months developing those kind of models in your non-prod environments and running this kind of rigorous check, whether it's a model risk management is what the classic term in financial sector is being used, that controls all this kind of check and balance to ensure that the applications or the models that you have built is production ready, right? And it checks all kind of their requirements from the risk perspective and ensuring that you're operating within the risk frameworks. Then you might be ready to deploy in productions, and then it becomes like business functions, right? It addresses some of the use case driven problems that you have identified at the early stage of the discussion. And then you lead into adoptions, right? Adoption is where I think maturizing this platform agnostic kind of the deliverables, and then making sure that you're directly impacting within organization and across the board, right? Second part, I would also think about, the principle behind this kind of the thing is what I heard from Bettina around, right? This is something my core of my heart when I started this framework, right? Which I brought it from one of my visiting fellow at MIT Media Lab. It's a 6-layer frameworks. And then when I introduced to our senior leaders, there was a fundamental discussion happen around why the principle is going to be very crucial. So there is a human-centered aspect discussion we had, and then integrity aspect of the data sets you use, and then where is the fairness checks, which is kind of fundamental need from the responsible AI, accountability functions, and then transparent and security and privacy. So these are kind of high facts, kind of the terminology. In fact, it's truly applicable to add here every organization who is going to adopt that kind of the journey to begin your AI functionality development and every aspect of the work you do, from design development to execution and adoption piece has been kind of like intertwined by this kind of principle discussion, right? And then if you look at the current trends, we came from this kind of data-centric model to now foundational model, which is kind of like generative AI. But if you look at the agentic AI, which I love to talk about this bias because it's one of the hype right now across the every strategy component is thinking about where the value is being realized over the time. So this also connects back to fundamental developments of the classic ERP system moving into rule-based robotic process automations phase, which is you have seen like a tremendous growth adoption on the rule-based AI systems being deployed across the businesses, now being taken over by generative AI, whether you call it as a co-pilot or you can call it as a chatbot. Kind of the view is further advancing into AI agentic workflow, where it's going from now to the autonomous state at some point and towards the AGI, right? What does autonomous states means that it's going to be beyond the rule base, but they will have their kind of the memory to interact and collaborate across different agents been running. Can be a single agent or multi-agent or the swarm of agent. So this is the promise I've seen is the maximum value realization that we'll continue to see across the boards in the next couple of years. Yeah. In terms of the adoptions and then the work that being delivered, there will be new kind of the enterprise will be created. There will be new kind of innovations will be coming in the flight, right? And the products and the platform will be built will be available to the world, right? That directly impact our society, industry, and organization. So I'll pause at this point of time, right, to save some time for Q&A towards the end as well, and allow our peers to bring more insights on this topic as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hira. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody got that masterclass on where we are, what to build, and what's next. We heard from perspectives from a more academic perspective with Melodena joining us from the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government in Dubai, and then Mark from Harvard Business School and Howard Kennedy. Of course, everybody has a lot more other stuff going on. And then perspectives from a more corporate large enterprise perspective, right? And we heard from Bettina from SAP and Hira from Bank of America. Now we're going to move over a little bit. Ray, I saw your question in the chat. Who are all the stakeholders? Great question, right? And I think it's sort of bringing that diversity over here and perspectives over here is kind of the starting to answer that question and begin to kind of chart the stakeholder map, if you may. So I'm very delighted to welcome Aurélie, who's joining us from Los Angeles, who has an AI startup, among other things. So Aurélie, maybe I can invite you on the stage here to introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone. Hello from all over the world. So yeah, so I'm Aurélie Jean. I'm a computational scientist. I'm running 2 startups, including a deep tech AI startup in medical application in early detection of breast cancer. And I'm also a writer, and I've been working a lot on algorithmic governance with Professor Mark Esposito here. So first, I really wanted to go back to the notion of algorithmic governance and what it is, as you mentioned, and obviously Bettina has mentioned, all the best practices and what we have to do to make sure that we formulate the problem, the business problem we want to solve correctly, that we test, validate, implement, deploy, and use the algorithmic technology, the AI technology correctly. And I just want to say something that is very important based on the first speech that we had. That when we think about algorithmic governance, it's really, for me, a way to empower people to think, to remain far away from any apocalyptic and long-termist vision of AI, because by having a right algorithmic governance, we can actually take advantage of the opportunities while remaining far away from and avoiding any threats. And it's very important to keep in mind, because the actual challenges, practical and current challenges of AI are not, what we can see and read, in some articles or statements, public statements, about the extermination of human being or civilization. No, it's about environmental impacts, as Melodena mentioned first, but also about digital labor, about the technology discriminations. All those things together are the real challenges. And obviously, to develop a right, excellent, a good algorithmic governance, we have to identify first, obviously, the stakeholders, as you mentioned. And I would like to go back to what Mark was saying as is trend number 6. You mentioned, Mark, about stakeholder engagement, and which is, to me, the big difference today between the algorithmic governance and any other governance in the past, because we realize that all stakeholders, from the person on the business side who formulate the problem to solve, to the end user that can be external to the company, obviously, can be a consumer, are actually involved in an algorithmic governance, are involved in the algorithmic project overall, because each stakeholder, it's also obviously implies the developers, but as well as scientists, engineers, and obviously the legislator. They all have rights, duties, and obligations, moral and legal obligations. And obviously, each stakeholder has to engage, but has also to understand his own rights, duties, and obligations, and rights, duty, and obligations of other stakeholders. And this is how we understand that the engagement is coming through a better knowledge and understanding of what we have to do as individuals, but also how much and how we are related to other stakeholders to make sure that we develop, test, validate, deploy, and use a technology that has no threats, in which we actually mitigated risk, and that the end user is understanding. And I know, Mark, you also mentioned that. It is, to me, very important. And so all those things together will allow us to make sure that we avoid threats. And so, Hira, you mentioned something about the fact that Gen AI leading to an ongoing effort about AI or algorithmic governance. And I totally agree with you, because, for instance, just about the digital labor, which is, to me, a very important topic, like the impact of AI deployment on the workforce, on people, individual competencies and collective competencies and skills. We have to make sure that everybody can actually leverage their own competencies, and not only the analytical one that the machine can actually simulate and model, but also, and even more, the emotional and practical ones, intelligences, to make sure that everyone can actually leverage their own competencies and skills in different tasks, in a job, in a company, in society in general. And so it's very important to understand that Gen AI actually is bringing some new challenges, but those challenges has the same level of priority as the one that we faced before in AI in general. So it's really, I would say that identifying the stakeholders is actually the first step before starting any AI project in a company, before buying or developing an AI technology. Identifying stakeholders, identifying their rights, duties, and obligations is, to me, key before starting a project, to make sure that then we are actually conceiving and deploying the right best practices internally and externally. Externally, meaning that we have the obligation as scientists, as engineers, as a company, we have the moral and legal obligation to explain the end users what's happening. It doesn't mean we're going to explain everything, because obviously we have some IP, but we have to explain the big picture. First, saying whether there is an AI running, then what the AI is doing, which type of data on which the AI was developed and on which the AI is running. It doesn't mean you give the entire set of data, but you give an ID, and you actually upskill the end user. And I always say that eventually the end user that was only an end user in the stakeholder category will become a collaborator, because the end user has to collaborate with the other stakeholders, from the company who owns the technology, the people who are developing the technology, the one who are selling the technologies, et cetera, including the legislator who is actually overseeing the entire process legally from a legal standpoint, have to consider the end user as a collaborator. So it's a very strong change in the paradigm, and that will obviously impact businesses, revenue models. And there is a very good book, by the way, in MIT Press that was written in 2016, I think, which is The Inversion Factor, that explains this from the data transformation, the data era. And I think it's even more that today in the AI era, based on the strong relationship, again, between the stakeholders. So it's actually an amazing opportunity, I feel, and I deeply think in society today that we have, because using AI, developing AI, we actually better understand how much dependent we are to each other and as individuals and collectively in society, and how much we have to help each other and to based on the rights, duty, and obligation. And I'm a strong believer of that. And as a scientist myself, I have to explain, what I do, and I have to answer a question. And I have the rights, to say no to any development if I think the threat is too high. And I have the duties to explain proactively what algorithmic science is. And I try to always question myself and my rights, duties, and obligations towards myself, towards other stakeholders, including the end user and the state and the legislator.
Thank you. Thank you, Aurélie, so much. I think that's a very strong and definite statement on it, I think, which is needed indeed, given the pace that the technologies are developing at. And I'm very excited, actually, on that point, to welcome our final roundtable host for today before we open up the floor to the roundtable participants. Jose, who has a long, I think, corporate history, but I think in this conversation, we're putting it under the think tank category. So Jose leads our applied AI practice and work group within the Digital Economist. And there's some very exciting tools the group is working on as well. So Jose, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, the group, and great to be here, and great to have so many people actually participating and looking forward for the questions. So I wanted to talk a bit about obviously the importance of the governance and the guardrails, and starting the guardrails, as my colleagues have already kind of mentioned, but also looking into a bit the responsibility and how do we embed it in business and how we should embed this in business. So it's obviously clear that governance and guardrails, in order for us to be able to set long-term value and promote the ambition that AI should and can deliver positive outcomes to all, governance is key to increase the trust for adoption, a bit of, as Hira mentioned, adoption of AI at scale, but also to ensure this democratization of opportunities which are generated by AI. Now, what we see today in the market, for sure, different stakeholders bringing AI to the consumption. We have the big tech companies, and we had some examples here, obviously taking the lead, not only in actually developing and taking to market AI, but also, as Bettina has shown us, a lot in the defining these guardrails as well. I think we can question whether it should be up to these companies to define this. Possibly not from an outside-in perspective, but it's great that we see that this is being done as well. We have big enterprises which are not tech related, also investing in AI and either bringing their own projects or by acquiring other AI companies or by embedding AI into their processes, which also approach the topic of governance in different manners. It can be by building their own policies on relying on their suppliers. We also look into the startups disrupting the market, and I think we cannot actually look into if we put ourselves in the position of a startup and look into the dilemma of gaining speed for go-to-market versus slowing down for compliance. I think it can be a difficult choice. And then we have everything in between. So we have organizations that somehow from all shapes, all sizes, trying to start somewhere to make a difference, trying to catch up across all others, and also having this reluctance potentially of actually starting with how to approach this responsibly. And at the end, we as consumers look also, as citizens, look also to our governments to see how they can perhaps provide agency and act as guarantors for for the implementation of responsible AI. And I think it's actually quite difficult as well, policy to be ahead of technology. It is difficult, but actually, can we somehow bridge that gap? So looking into all these stakeholders, obviously, I feel there's obviously the potential there for a big mess, but also, obviously we are all here exactly trying to do what we should do, which is discuss it. If we look at technology advancements in the past, and if we look at when did we actually start discussing the impacts, probably with AI, we are now much ahead in discussing this than we were, for example, with social media and with other type of technologies. Now, so if you look at governance and we really look into setting these guardrails with agency, it's also in a way of looking how can we make sure that we increase trust between consumers and all the stakeholders that I mentioned before. And how can we, by that, ensure that we achieve this equitable access to opportunities, and this opportunity to actually create value for a greater good as well. And I think we very often ask the wrong question on whether how can a person or a consumer in general, why they do not trust a certain business organization. So when an organization starts looking into trust levels from their consumers, they try to understand why they are not being trusted. I think we should turn that question around. The question actually should be, why should businesses be trustworthy, and why should people actually trust those businesses as a whole? And this trust operates at different levels. So obviously the technology itself, in this case for AI, is one thing because it's new, but also the players, so the implementers, the ones that take it to the market, to the consumers, and also overall the business network. Overall, you can call it business network, the supply chain, you can call it as you wish, but the whole ecosystem that brings AI to our consumption. And I really feel that guardrails do need to be set at all these levels. But I think probably we need to also look at ourselves and have a critical look in how we implement AI. And then when I say ourselves, I actually mean here, any given business that implements AI and wants to take initiatives to the market. And how can we actually do it responsibly? So how can we look into our own strategies? How can we actually look into the way we use data, the way we use infrastructure, the way we actually look into the skills of our organization? And also, obviously, the big topic that we have here today, how we actually can create a governance that really foments somehow the application of AI. So regardless of the size, the purpose of the business, these guardrails are indeed essential. And maybe today, and we start with that, potentially having this kind of a look for a collective commitment that, let's set these guardrails just not as a nice to have, but actually as a must to make this happen. And I think that with that, probably, Navroop, I will lead over to you. I think people may be very eager to ask questions to the hosts.
Thank you very much, Jose. Indeed, we have around 12 minutes left, and I'm starting to see hands being raised. So please go ahead, do that, and we'll keep it to maybe 1 minute each. If you have a comment, then 1 minute, and if you have a question, maybe even shorter, because somebody has to respond to it too. So okay, so I see P. Sony and then Tatiana in that order. So please take it away, ask your question or add your comment.
Hi. I'll lower my hand. Hi, my name is Padmini Soni, and thank you to the hosts and the panelists for this excellent discussion. My question was around OpenAI's. It has reportedly introduced this 5-tier system to track progress towards AGI. And we are, I believe, at level 2, which is more like reasoners, human level problem solving, level 1 being chatbots, and level 5 being organizational AI. I mean, AI can do the work of an organization. Now, in the US, we just have the executive order. So in the absence of real regulations, I would like to know what the panelists think about this progress towards AGI. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Padmini, right? Did I get your name right?
Yeah.
Great. I recognize that name. Maybe I actually had the same question as you, Padmini. I was going to ask, we have so many perspectives, so much to figure out. I'm curious, maybe Mark, you have a response to it, sort of like, what would it mean from like a abstract perspective? You kind of take a step back and, you talked about, and I think Hira talked about AGI as well. Maybe we can ask Mark and see if anybody else would like to chime in.
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief. I realize there are more questions. So thank you for your question. Look, I think the idea of a fully automated organization already happens in the context of the DAO, right? The decentralized autonomous organizations. So if you're going to get to a point where you have an entirely automated task, that'll be it. Even if that is going to happen, I don't see this to be a societal challenge whatsoever. I also find that the difference between the implementation from a design perspective to the action on the ground requires so many non-linear distribution that it will be unlikely that the technology will take care of everything. So I don't find that the fact that we're automating will naturally displace the way organization currently work. What will displace is the obsolescence of processes that were designed when technology did not do what it does right now. So I find it much more as a catalyst towards the transformation of the workforce, rather than necessarily looking at this as a ratio of what we used to do and what will eventually become an AGI model. So this is, I think, a conversation to have in terms of it's already happening. It will likely happen to the degree where we can possibly manage tasks that tends to be linearly conceived. There will be a significant number of tasks that will not be able to be contemplated by algorithmic governance because there tend to be lots of outliers and awkward logics that need to be managed from a managerial perspective. And the transformation of the labor force to much more 21st century kind of narrative that are coming from the idiosyncrasy of this kind of conversation, different from the industrial policy model that we have inherited for 250 years. So moving on to the next question. Thank you for your question. It was fascinating.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Padmini, for the question as well. So we have Tatiana, who's raised her hand, and then followed by Lena. Tatiana, please ask your question or add your comment in 30 seconds or 1 minute at most. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you to all the panelists for sharing some very interesting insights. My question is more focused on Dr. Esposito's segment, but I'd love to hear what the other panelists think as well. So my question is, what do you believe are some key principles organizations should keep in mind in order to deploy AI ethically in their operations or in whatever they offer to their customers?
Thank you, Tatiana. Maybe Melodena, I think since you started the conversation with exactly that, it'd be great to get your insights.
Yeah, sure. So I guess you have to start with the human-centric principle. Why are you using AI and what is the benefit for the human being, right? And that becomes an interesting discussion because sometimes we perceive the benefit will lead to profits, but we're not looking at the wider community. And I think that's why I think that humanity first and planet flourishing is an important provision. So in the small experiments we've done in the classrooms where people focus on the problem and try and understand how AI is a tool and it's not the end, nor is it the beginning, it becomes a lot more easier to understand why it's being fit in. So we need to shift the way we're thinking about AI. It's a tool. And a tool can be used for good reasons or for bad reasons. And I think that's the way I would start. But great question.
Thank you, Melodena. I appreciate it. Great question as well. Indeed, I agree, Tatiana. So we have Elena next, who's raised her hand. Elena, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking my question. I am very interested in the framework described by Hira here, but also I think others can respond as well. So the AI kind of fairness and responsibility and impact of AI is being thought about as risk assessment and mitigation, as far as I understand. So I'm interested in how questions of fairness, for example, are considered within this framework, especially given that now there's a whole debate in the computer science field about how exactly to measure fairness. There's different conceptualizations. They don't all fit together. So within the risk mitigation framework, whether, the world is biased, data is biased, we're propagating bias when we create algorithms on this kind of data. How, in this case, will the risk framework address this issue? Thank you.
Okay, so I think, yeah, I consider this as two parts, right? MLOps and the generative AI space, but when we talk to the framework side around the risk mitigations, we need to understand how we are ingesting data from, right? Making sure that we understand the source of origin whether it's human generated, machine generated kind of the data that goes into like a data management and the correlation kind of the view within MLOps. You have this kind of experimentations and evaluation phase where we can look at this kind of the fairness check, right? The different guardrails that need to introduce within the Gen AI space. I think the prompt optimization is where I have seen a lot of the this kind of risk mitigation question coming play, right? Introducing certain controls, filtering kind of the view where you can do reductions, right? Reduction of the data sets to make sure that you can do it real time versus non-real time, that make sure that you don't collect data, whether you're having a customer calls that can be redacted on real time before this gets stored within the systems of enterprise, right? It's basically risk mitigation help connects from the data sides to model and AI. And we have to look at from the holistic point of the view, right? Making sure the stewards are involved from the each component view. And as you're working on the data silos to model and the AI, there's requirements involved to understand that we can address the risk maybe from the AI principle side, right? The fairness and then the ethical standards. And there's certain standards that are already built that we addressing those kind of standards as well, right? And then on MLOps, I have a 6-layer frameworks I have introduced to the industry as well, right? How we can fully and seamlessly and scalable deployment of models in the production. And there are certain, I just posted some kind of nutrition facts that could be like funny, and I just recently got from one of the CI Executive Summit. I posted on the chat window. That could be something to look at as well. It's very interesting insights out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Hira. And I was going to say, if any of the hosts have any resources further to what they discussed and shared here, please do share that in the chat. And also, the participants may have some interesting resources as well. There's a lot of AI experts in this room today, so it's very much a conversation here. We have 2 minutes left, and Lincoln has raised his hand. So Lincoln, the floor is yours. This is going to be our final question. I see a lot of action in the chat, but we'll continue that, after today. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. And this is actually just open question for everyone here. So if we think of this as a philosophy of no one left behind, how can we actually bring the general population along to teach them actually AI literacy to a point where they can, for example, not be susceptible to like any misinformation, or being able to really ensure that they are educating themselves in regards to AI and how this can really be an opportunity for them? Because otherwise, I feel like if they leave the general population behind who don't have the chance to engage, then they're just going to be more susceptible to the harms rather than reap the benefits. An open question for anyone who wants to answer.
Thank you. It's the best question I could think of to close this conversation, but open to the host, whoever would like to take it up.
Yeah, could I just take that one? So I believe you're absolutely right. The European Union talks about AI literacy, which is very different from digital literacy. So I think that's the fundamental thing. We have this, there's a lot of hype in media currently right now. And I think this is what is creating a lot of the challenges. You could see that with ChatGPT coming in and the huge scale of adoption without us understanding behind the scenes, whether it's actually helping us or benefiting us for work. So I think the main thing is, how can we get all the perspectives of what AI can do and be ruthlessly honest? How can we change research not to only be one-sided? It's not going to kill us all, nor is it going to be the savior of all mankind, at the same time. It does it in steps if we use it properly. So how do we find the balance? And I think these kind of conversations we need to educate. I also just want to add this, most of the conversations are happening in the Western world. We're leaving the global South behind. And I think that's something we need to be very aware of, that we make sure we bring them along in the conversations.
Thank you, Melodena. Appreciate it. Any of the other hosts who'd like to add anything to that question? Great. If not, then I think we'll close on time, exactly on time. This is a record today. Usually these conversations go a few minutes over. Appreciate the thoughtful question, Lincoln, and the thoughtful response there, Melodena, as well. With that, I would like to thank all of you, the hosts first and foremost, and the participants for joining us today. Today is also a very special day. We're launching our executive fellowship. So all of you who are a live audience today have this announcement before next week, before the world finds out about it. So I think Shruti has shared some of those links there as well. So please feel free to see if that's of interest to you. We are very excited to welcome new intellectuals and professionals and leaders into the community starting in a month's time or so. Of course, you can find us at thedigital-economist.com, and we'll send a follow-up to all of you with the resources we discussed today. And with that, thank you very much. We'll see you very soon in the next one.
Thank you. Great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you. See you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.